Hi, and welcome to another edition of Culturama. Woo-hoo! We have with us today none other than David Kahl, who comes all the way by I-5 from good old Portland.
Yes, sir.
How was your trip today?
Eventful.
Eventful. We won't go into it.
We won't go into it.
Okay. Anyway, David and I are going to be talking music in a few minutes, but I have Crater Lake in the background that represent the open-mindedness of our discourse here today at CCTV Channel 22. Okay. David, where were you born?
I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon.
And you've seen some changes since the early days?
I've seen a lot of changes. I remember when the city limit was 82nd Avenue and everything beyond that was woods and cow pastures.
Wow. Wow. Were you around when they delivered milk by, with the milk box and all?
With bottled milk and
Right.
and a delivery man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I remember my mom, may she rest in peace, they used to put notes of what your next delivery is in the neck of the milk bottle
Yes.
way back when.
Oh, yes. I remember that.
And I remember the old style good humor ice cream trucks, ding-a-ling-a-ling, and the kids would come out like Piper Land and
all of that.
they groove over it, to use a new
yeah.
fashion word and all.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a favorite ice cream flavor way back then?
All of them.
All of the above. But your belly doesn't show it. You're not quite a junior Buddha yet. You're getting there.
Well,
Okay, good. Anyway, I'd like to ask you a little bit about how you got into the music game, trade, whatever you want to call it. Let's go back to your days in middle school, junior high, whatever it was called. Were you a musician then? Did you play an instrument or sing?
my
or what?
first instrument
Yeah.
at the age of 5
Uh-huh.
was the accordion. There was a salesman who went door to door
Mm-hmm.
hustling up students, and mom and dad, mom in particular,
Yeah.
were suckers for it. So they rented the accordion, got the lessons for my older brother and myself, and it was fine. It just wasn't the instrument that I wanted to play. I went through a few changes in the course of grade school, and then in middle school I picked up the piano,
Mm-hmm.
took lessons, got a reasonably good foundation from there, but it was sitting in on my brother's guitar lessons that really
That turned you on?
it did more than that. I would sit in, absorb what I could, and there was one day when his teacher was asking him to play along while the teacher, played chords, but he wanted me to pick up the bass parts, and I kept thinking, bass?
He was off base.
You mean like the upright? And he says, well, they have this thing is called a bass guitar. You can hear the part. And he played the record for me, and it was the first time that this sound really jumped out at me. And I realized that that was the voice that I wanted to express. And it took me a lot of years to realize why. If you know anything about how bands work, you have this diversity of expression from rhythmic to harmonic. But the bass essentially is taking all of them into consideration and first establishing certain patterns, including subtext, and pretty much from there marrying common elements of rhythm and harmony to each other.
Give us some examples, because the lay audience out there is not musically sophisticated. Neither am I, really.
Well, essentially, you have rhythmically, you can break things down into cadences that can be divided by 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
You just determine which of those it is. But then from there is one consistent common point, and that is a quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 4, or if it's a waltz, 1, 2, 3,
A timing
1,
element
2,
as
3.
well as a tonality.
And then you get tonality, and with the tonalities, you have all of these potentials. You have
Then
12. You have all these.
The rhythm part. Then.
Well, no, this
Not
this is harmonic. What you're talking about in harmony is that there are certain consistent voices, certain notes that lay a clear foundation for whatever chord or whatever melody is being expressed. And bass is essentially looking for that foundation, marrying it to that rhythmic foundation, and then bringing everything together, mediating. And that mediating point is establishes some contextual sense to everything else if you're doing your job right. If not, then people notice.
Now, you played professionally as a musician for a while?
My first professional gig was in 1967. And as a matter of fact, until recently, I spent the last few years playing with a local, very talented, gifted guitarist, singer, songwriter who's now in Austin, Texas, Ty Curtis. And
I've heard that name.
well, Ty's someone that should be on everybody's radar. If it's not already. He's
I think he's played in Salem quite a few times.
young fella, and he's got, but
Gifted,
his gift is beyond, way beyond his years. Writes an intelligent song. I've really grown more than fond of him. I'm one of his most ardent fans even now.
Hey, Ty.
Oh gosh.
You have ties to ties.
In fact, Ty is scheduled to return here next week, I believe.
Okay. We're actually looking for, not for him in particular, on Father's Day, which is the 19th of June, we're planning to have a World Refugee Peace Vigil over Peace Plaza, which is between our library and City Hall, and we're going to dedicate that to both praying interfaith-wise for the safety of the refugees in war zones all around the world, and also we're going to introduce the 30 or 40 that have come to Salem and try to create a positive climate. There are about half a dozen churches already adopting refugee families. It's very ennobling that they're doing that.
I'm glad to hear that. Actually, I come from a family of where my mother and father are both Syrian, so
Interesting.
so that one really hits home.
Have you been to Syria ever?
In 1964.
Oh, that was a whole
It was a whole lifetime
other
ago.
era, yeah. Okay. We may be getting Syrians, but so far we're working through the Catholic Charities Agency out of Portland, but they have a substation here, one of their churches. And we actually had their refugee resettlement director as our guest about 2 weeks ago. Very lovely lady.
Wonderful.
From Hillsborough and all.
My cousin was, my Syrian cousin, Victor Attia, was former governor of this state.
Last Republican governor in the
Yeah.
1970s, I believe.
Yeah.
Sometime. And he's in the carpet business, his family.
He sure was. Anyway,
Yes.
getting back to music, music has always been a passion, and I've been fortunate because especially in the blues community over the last 35 years, I've had the opportunity to play with a lot of great, well-recognized, at least in the blues, artists. Some of my heroes actually growing up, and
Such as?
Pinetop Perkins, who was the piano player for Muddy Waters and the house pianist for the longest continuously running radio show in the United States.
Man, oh man.
King
Wow.
Biscuit Flower Hour, and I also got to play with Hubert Sumlin, who was the guitarist for Howlin' Wolf. Played with. It's. I've had people say it's easier to run a list of who I haven't played with.
Okay, good. Let's start transitioning into one of your key passions right now. We call it Through the Music Maze. And tell us a little bit about some of the concepts and paradigms that you've developed and how you want to approach some of the inequities, I guess you'd call it, in the music industry.
Well, fundamentally, actually this speaks to this propensity that I have towards mediating. A bass player's mindset is ideally suited to tackle this project, mediating and facilitating.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I spent a lot of time listening to both band leaders and sidemen and venue owners complain, and the consistency of their complaints pretty much had a strong impact on me. But there got to be a point where I kept hearing the same complaints over and over.
David, what was the nature of the complaints? What was there?
Oh,
What was
gosh.
bugging them, man?
Well, name it. There was everything from, there's actually been a fairly consistent trajectory, but a transition as things have developed over the years. Initially, it was about getting a gig, getting paid well for a gig, having something consistent on the books. How do I find a venue? How do I find, if I'm a venue, how do I find an artist that's reliable, that's responsible, that's going to deliver the goods?
So it's connections.
But at the heart of it, there was this need for consistency in communication and in confirming commitments. And from there, it got to issues of, how do I get my bandmates to clearly commit to this project, and of course it's find them work. Well, how do I find work? Well, back then it was get on the phone, ask other people. Over a period of time, it got down to, the internet starting to open up some pathways.
Dave, that question was kind of indirectly posed to me. I was very surprised with somebody all the way from Idaho who will be on the show in a few weeks. He is making a special trip from Idaho to Salem in a van, I guess with his instruments and other stuff, and he wants to find, as long as he's here, and this is, of course, we're free here. We don't charge people who. He wants to find if he can do a gig, a venue here. So I put him in touch with Tom Maynard Rastrelli. I think I could use your name on camera. And he is the culture reporter for the Daily Statesman Journal. So he knows what's going around. Also, Carly Wright is another arts reporter. She actually does a lot of the venues. And between them, I think they could point them in a direction of places that would hire somebody like him.
Well, and that is essentially the old analog model.
Yeah.
And that has basically been the principle of relationship building that has developed into what I've spent the last 16 years on in ideating a new platform, essentially something that promises to be a new model for the whole of the music industry. It gets down to this:
Go ahead. Yeah.
you've got a music industry that is decidedly product centric. It's about what you've just recorded, what you're about to record, the gig that you've just played, and the ones that are coming down the line. And the fact of the matter is that there's much more process that precedes that point of product and that ensues from it. And at this point, there are, because the internet has opened up pathways to communication, to exploration, to discovery.
Definitely.
You have access to all of these resources, all of these means of getting yourself heard. But you get into elements like, well, Spotify, streaming services that get your music out there, get it heard by thousands, sometimes millions.
It's like a cyber megaphone.
Well, yes, but ultimately, the complaint becomes the residuals that the actual creator receives are minuscule compared to the revenue that's generated from it. Intellectual property is a real critical issue right now.
That's true.
And that said, while the particulars of issues that arise are varied, fundamentally, in principle, there's a consistency from one to the next. It boils down to, for me, in recognizing that for whatever complaint there is, suggesting that there's a problem, that there's a solution somewhere implied in that. And for me, it was a matter of looking at music in the broader sense, to identify music is highly individual, and yet it's universal. It's amorphous, but it's very defined. And that said, there are so many different pathways that musical interest, endeavor, involvement, connection can go. The first thing that I undertook was to try to identify all these different pathways that the musical conversation could go.
So it's like a flow chart on music in a sense.
As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, once this vision for how many different pathways could be created and how they could be connected was ultimately laid out in 60 pages of flowcharts that outline every type of relationship at play.
Extraordinary.
When I first started out, I wanted to just attend to some simple management functions for the individual. How can you coordinate your commitments with each other?
It morphed.
Well, what it was this laundry list of complaints, and when I saw this list, I realized that if one's going to offer a critique,
right,
you can describe all you want. It doesn't solve anything.
You need remedies.
The second part of a critique is to prescribe, and so I
Absolutely.
laid out essentially this summary critique
Mm.
that a bass student of mine happened to see and encouraged me to move the next step. He says, Dave, you ought to take this to this other friend of ours who's a senior software architect at Hewlett Packard. Uh, I knew the guy as a guitarist. I had no idea of his other background. And once I laid it out to him, he said, David, this is not only comprehensive and clear, but it's very doable. You should put a business plan together behind this. And I'm thinking, business plan? I just want to help.
Let me ask a relevant question, hopefully, maybe a little naive. Is there anything like a better business bureau in the music trade, the music industry? I don't know. I have ASPCA, but I don't know, or the
You mean
ASCAP.
ASCAP?
ASCAP. But I think that they're more of a trade
ASCAP and
union.
BMI and
That's
CSAC are performance
the
rights
trade
organizations.
organizations.
It's a completely different.
Yeah, but it's not like a better business bureau that would monitor and see that you want to swell ethics or, it's not a problem-solving organization really.
No,
It's
no. Well, if you want to talk, see, and again, it's
educate me, educate
well,
us.
because
out there.
because well, and you actually nailed with that one word the point of this vision that I call my GigNet.
Mhm.
When I took this plan, this idea, this seed, to a friend, he says, here are the questions that you got to answer," and the bottom line for me was, I could answer all of these questions, but there was this one glaring one that implied so much more, and it boiled down to education. Education. You can have information. Does it educate? If not, how can you get it to? And so fundamentally, I saw the implications of education on the one hand, but then another issue arose. At which point, upon entry into this site, do you include community members, as it were? And for me, it was as simple as, I'm interested. So you have to start from the 0 point, which means that essentially, not just are you appealing to and offering tools for the accomplished professional or the accomplished aspiring professional, but you have to go all the way to the student and the fan, because they're all part of this music community. We know, for example, that music is hardwired into our neurological makeup. There's all sorts of empirical evidence in support of it. In fact, musical processes exist even in the brain of a barn owl, and they're consistent with those same processes in a human being. That said, what I was looking to do was to recognize, of course, the universal nature of music as a bridge builder, something that does not know religion, race, creed, national boundaries.
It's pervasive.
It is, yes, but it is decidedly individual.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in something, my own little anecdote footnote here. Happened when I was maybe 8 or 9, up in the country, Catskill Mountains, upstate New York. First time I was left alone with the piano in a recreation room. People were eating dinner, whatever. I tickled the keyboard, and I noticed that each note had a different tone to it, and some were friendlier to my ears, user friendly, and some were more dissonant, and I could shift them aside. And a few years later, I became a teenager, and I began calling my friends, boyfriends, girlfriends on the telephone. And I began to see a connection, an analogy that when I wanted certain personalities, it was like a favorable note that would play on the keyboard, and there were certain personalities that were not appropriate or suitable for that time, and I would avoid them and shunt them aside. And so a piano and a telephone, in a way, brings the family of social supports to me in the same way that playing a piano is. So I thought we
Well,
could digest that a little bit.
well, that's not unusual. The fact is
Yeah.
that there are when if you want to identify,
Yep.
for example, what this platform is addressing s- to you as
Yes,
an example
yes.
is that you can say Dave Kahl's a musician. Dave Kahl's a bass player. You can refine it. You can define it in the narrowest of terms, and you could parse everything out. But musical identity goes beyond any singular thing that you do.
I agree.
And so, for me, it was let's determine what kind of functional structure a, 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 a resource for information, for all sorts of musical information and services.
Yeah. Dave, we have about a minute left, so I want you to kind of give a concluding thought.
Well,
What's your ultimate message to our public out there?
well, I had thought we were going to have a little more time, but that said, there's if you are looking for something that goes beyond just being a simple tool,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to be part of something that's much grander, much bigger, something that will actually change the whole shape of the music industry,
Yeah.
and that creates a community that acts as an economy,
Mm-hmm.
that functions as a hub for for areas of musical education, in business, composition and publishing, recording and distribution, performance development, professional services.
Good. Let's do it.
Then come to it, help build it.
Okay.
It's not
Thank
mine.
you, David. That is our crusade for the future.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
God bless you.
Fun having you.